I'm Janine Shearer, the General Manager of the Monash Precinct Network. Welcome to this Innovation of the Future interview with Michael McQueen. This video is proudly presented by the Monash Precinct Network and was developed and hosted by our partner, Monash Tech School. This project is a testament to our commitment to shaping the future of innovation in our community and beyond.
Hi everyone, my name is Jemima Nash and today we are here at Monash Tech School hosting a Q&A session as part of Monash Precinct Network's Innovation of the Future project. We're really excited to have our esteemed guest, Michael McQueen, join us for today's interview. Michael is a renowned speaker, author, thought leader on innovation and technology and much more. Today we have the opportunity to draw upon the expertise that Michael has as we delve into questions that will serve to benefit and inspire students. Welcome Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We're really excited to have you here today. So to kick off the interview, I'd really love to know how you would describe what you do in your career to a Year 10 student.
Yeah, I have a weird job, really, in many ways. So my job is to essentially help organisations and leaders figure out what's going to shape their future. So sometimes that's working with the executive leaders of a company, sometimes it's working with an entire government department or policy directors, people who are basically trying to figure out how do they get ready for the things that will essentially either disrupt them or become opportunities in the next 3 or 4 years, depending on how ready they are. So every day is different. Every industry is different. Like last week, I was working with abattoir operators on Monday in New Zealand, random, I know. And then it was like real estate agents, and then it was insurance people, accountants, and then local government people. That was like 5 different clients in a week. So I love the variety. And the interesting thing is so many industries are in similar spots right now. They're facing the same sorts of technologies and issues, and they're asking the same questions. So even though there's a lot of variety in the clients I work with, there's a lot of commonality as well.
Well, obviously there's a lot in that, and it's really broad, and you've obviously achieved a lot in your career. So I'd really love to know if during school, did you know what career path you wanted to follow? Because it's obviously taken a bit to get here, and like how did this develop and change throughout school and uni?
Yeah. So in one way, the answer is yes, I always knew what I wanted to do. So strangely, I remember when I was 8 years of age, my parents went to a conference for their work and the babysitter fell through. So my brothers and I, one of 5 boys, so we all traipsed along to this conference, sat at the back. And the speaker on stage that day was communicating, I think it was about personality styles. And even as an 8-year-old, I was like fascinated at the skill and the craft of being on a stage in front of a huge audience and holding that audience captive essentially and captivated. And I thought, that's cool. I remember saying to mum and dad as we were leaving at the end of the conference, I want to do that when I'm grown up. And they sort of politely, as parents who went, oh yes, that's interesting, thinking it was a bit of a random thought, but it stuck. And so all the way through school and teenage years, I'm like, how do you get into that world where you can essentially be writing, thinking, philosophizing, and then sharing what you're learning and doing with audiences? For some reason, randomly, I always was attracted to that, attracted to listening to good communicators on stage. I was the nerdy kid at school that if you had to do like something public at assembly or whatever, I'm like, I'll do it. So I actually always liked this sort of work. So in a way, it was always on the radar. But being specifically focused on what I do now, that's naturally evolved. I originally started off looking at generational change, so the whole gap between my generation, so Gen Y, and the baby boomers and the Gen Xers. So when I first started this work and writing books, I was 22. I'm like, you can't be an expert in too much when you're 22, but I can be an expert in being a youngish person. So that's where I started, was trying to help older generations understand young people. And then over time, that has evolved. So what I do in terms of the shape or what it looks like is sort of what I always hoped for, even as a kid. But the actual deployment of that, the stuff I do, the type of content and research I look at, that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you touched on that you did like a bit of public speaking in high school and that sort of things. Did you do any subjects that related to that? Like what kind of subjects did you study and how did they influence what you chose to study at university?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think at school, I always felt this tension at school, and I still feel it now, that there's a degree to which at school you've got to play the game. You've got to figure out the subjects that will work best for not just your timetable, because I mean, ideally I would have liked to have done modern history, but in all the timetabling of subjects, that wasn't an option. So I remember thinking, okay, well, if I can't choose that, what do I choose that's going to set me up to win? And so I chose subjects that would have that nice balance of, really using your brain and being super academic focused, and the ones that you could have a bit of fun with, things like drama and visual arts. So I really tried to have the balance, because I saw too many friends who are a few years older burning out halfway through sort of those senior years because it's so full on, so stressful. And so I my wife laughs at this. I did 3-unit art and have not done an artwork since. But I think what I was interested in was sort of design and aesthetics, which I use every day in terms of branding and even helping clients with their branding. But like when I think of what I actually did, it was a very random choice, but I'm grateful I did it because it taught me a very different skill set. And it was a bit of a pressure release from being, buried in textbooks. So for me, it was choosing subjects intentionally with that in mind.
No, absolutely. It's so important to have that sort of release, particularly because it is so stressful.
Yeah.
You touched on earlier how you started in that sort of generation gap expertise, but can you share how your professional journey began and what early inspirations guided you?
Yes, so initially, while it was sort of on the radar to do the sort of work I do, I had to find mentors. And I think the thing is, what I would encourage young people to always do is look for people who are a couple of years down the track from where you are in terms of doing what you want to do, but not just in terms of doing what you want to do with excellence, but they're the kind of people you want to be, their values and their integrity. Like to me, I identified people who were actually quite famous. They were out there on the speaker circuit, they were authors, but I liked what they stood for as much as how clever they were. And so a couple of them, I sought them out and just asked if I could buy them coffee, buy them lunch, and get their advice. And that one word advice, I think, was such a key that unlocked so much. Because when you've got a young person that comes to you and you're successful in your field, and someone says, I'd really love to get your advice, as long as you're genuinely interested, you're not trying to get something from them, you just want to learn from their wisdom, people are pretty open to doing that. And those few of those early connections, they were key connections in terms of getting into the industry and just sort of finding my feet. So I think that was really significant.
When you were finding your feet, did you experience any sort of resistance to new ideas that you brought in? Because I imagine as a young person wanting to talk about generation, there was probably some people that were like, why? What do you have to share?
Huge amounts. So there's always resistance to change. I think one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years, I've been writing a book around the psychology of stubbornness over the last little while. And that's been really interesting to look at why do people not change even when they want to? What is that? We all do this. We get stuck in mindsets that actually don't serve us or our teams or the organization or the world broadly well, but we get stuck in them. And the research around the neuroscience of stubbornness is interesting because we often have this assumption that people are afraid of change, and they're not. What they're afraid of is loss. And so if you just park on that for a moment, when someone's resisting change, and I found that consistently when I was in the early days, I'd be this young punk, 22, 23-year-old, in many cases 20 years younger than the people I was speaking to and doing work with. So I had to be mindful of what's their fear of loss in this. And I didn't realize that was a language I was sort of focusing on, but it really was. So what were they afraid of losing? Often they were afraid of losing certainty. They were afraid of losing control, often afraid of losing dignity. They want to be made to look like a fool. And so I was like, how do you introduce ideas to people in a way that allows them to save face, to not feel like they're an idiot if they didn't know this already? And I think so often when young people go into teams and roles and organizations, often out of a sense of imposter syndrome or a lack of confidence, there's sometimes a brash arrogance. Like, I'm going to tell you how the world is. I'm going to tell you all just what you should be thinking and doing. And it's like that's the first way to get someone who's older than you to get their back up, because suddenly you've backed them into a corner to make them feel like they're going to lose status or power or dignity if they take on board what you've suggested. So for me, it was trying to approach every interaction with as much openness and humility as possible, realizing that I was young. And so I had to earn the right to have a voice. But once you had the voice, and as long as you'd approached it respectfully and with humility, people were actually incredibly open.
You touched on there about confidence and openness. I want to talk about some skills that students have that they might not be aware of. So what are some of those skills that kids, young people today are having that could be really beneficial for their future, and maybe they're just not aware of them?
Well, first thing I'd say is you were young, and that is, it's funny when you are young, like when you're sort of 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, you seem to think that everyone else has got it figured out. All the older people, with the titles and the offices and the dress code of, say, corporate world or academia, everyone's got it sorted out. A quick lesson, a great encouragement I'd give you is no one has figured it out. And the more you start to interact with people, and I interact with people who are very high-level senior leaders, and when you actually speak to them, they're all basically saying the same thing. We're all just figuring it out. We're all finding our way here. No one's got a rule book, particularly right now. I mean, every organization's grappling with things like generative AI. And it doesn't matter what your level of experience is, this is new to everyone. And so I think every leader, I'll just encourage you to realize that not everyone's got it figured out. That's the important thing first up. Second thing is you've got a perspective that's valuable because you are a native of the world that every business leader, every organizational leader, every brand is trying to connect with. For instance, the last few weeks, the number of conversations I've had with leaders who've said, we all know we've got to use TikTok, but we have no idea where to start. And you know what they're all saying? We need to hire a young person, like truly someone who just lives and breathes this, because this is their natural habitat. So we need to get them on board because they know how to do this. And so I would just say as a young person, you've got a unique perspective because you know the world that many of the leaders right now are trying to understand so they can get ready for, because you've been a product of that world. And so you've got a lot of value and a great perspective to give.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on AI there briefly, and given there is a growing interest in STEM, how can students decide on a career path without knowing the impact that something like AI and robotics could have on the industry? Because it's all really unknown at the moment.
Well, I mean, firstly, I would say, what's your alternative? I mean, the idea, if you sit back and just go, I'll just wait until we know what the future's going to look like and then I'll make a decision. One of the best things a mentor ever told me was you can't steer a parked car. And so as long as you're moving and doing something and progressing in something, you can always steer. But if you're motionless and standing still, you can turn a steering wheel as much as you like, you just wear the tires out. You're not going anywhere. And so I think if you just find whatever's in front of you that is of interest, that you think will be relevant for your future, even if it's studying a piece of technology like, hey, this tech could be superseded in 2 years, I bet there's something about learning that technology or that platform or that form of coding that even if that gets superseded in 2 years' time, the process of what you learn is still going to be useful. And if it does find you sort of at a bit of a dead end, just steer and go a new direction. But what I would say is don't stop. That sense of paralysis that the world is so uncertain, we don't know where it's going to go, so we'll just do nothing until we have more certainty, is the most dangerous thing that anyone can do. So I would say take steps toward the things that you think will be relevant and interesting and valuable in the future. You might be right, you might not, who knows? None of us do, truly. But there's a lot that's changing right now, so as long as you're doing something, you can always adapt.
Touched on the phrase, don't stop. How can a young person kind of encourage other people to be excited and embrace AI? Because if they're excited about something and they're passionate about it and they know there's possibilities in, say, a new technology or a new program that involves it, how can you encourage other people to get on board?
I think it depends who you're trying to get on board. So if you're trying to get on board, say, older people perhaps, or your boss or someone senior that isn't familiar with this, the first thing is, again, what is the sense of, what's the fear of loss there associated? And often there is that loss of certainty or a loss of dignity. So they're afraid that if they try something new and it falls flat, they'll be embarrassed. So what you want to do is try and introduce the idea to them as something that you've sort of done a bit of testing, and you can point to other organizations that have tried this and implemented it. Here's what's worked for them. So you can allay some of those fears. But I think the best thing you can do is basically show why what you think is valuable is valuable. So share examples and data as much as you can that tells the story. Not data on its own, but tells a story, for instance, of why this is a compelling thing you can't ignore. So if you look at, for instance, the last few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about generative AI. And so as I'm working with clients, rather than just describing the ins and the outs, the functionality of generative AI, I show them what businesses are doing. So I'll sit down with a real estate agent and I'll say, okay, when I'm working with agents who are using generative AI, they'll go into ChatGPT and they'll put in a prompt like, write me a 4-week social media campaign for a new house listing. And then I go, I show them. And you should see their eyes open. It's like, wow. I mean, they've heard about it. They've got a bit of a sense that it does cool stuff. There's often a sense of fear, but when you show them what it does and show them what others are doing and show them how effective it can be, the level of openness radically increases. So I think as much as you can tell the story by pointing to what others are doing and why it's working, the more enthusiasm you can generate.
Absolutely. I love that example of showing people, because I think it's a great way to get any sort of message across. I want to jump into something a little different. Encouraging diversity and inclusion is a really important thing in workplaces, but many sectors, including the tech industry, are known for its gender and diversity gaps. For young individuals that are hesitant to enter fields where they could face that exclusion, what sort of message would you share to inspire them to still pursue their passion and not be scared by what the possibility could be?
Yeah, it's It's a big issue, hey? And it's diversity across all of the expressions of that. And I think the encouraging thing I would say is that right now there is such an openness and a willingness to make organisations far more broad and diverse. And so the more you can show that you're bringing a perspective that represents that, you'll actually find right now it's a real opportunity. In fact, if you've got a diverse view or come from a diverse background, that has become a real asset in a wonderful way, because now you've got organisations and leaders who are looking for that. So I think what you'll find is when you go into organisations, you'll probably find right now, and I'm working with the leaders of these organisations, and the questions they're asking, they're all looking to become far more diverse and open. And so I would say, don't fear that the doors will be closed. Press them gently. You'll be amazed how many actually open quite easily.
Absolutely. I like that sentiment. Obviously, COVID changed a lot for everyone. But we want to sort of touch on how it's changed education, because it's affected a lot of things. There was learning online. It's now really common in universities for some things to just be done online. So what sort of effect do you think that's had on education, and what do you think that means for education in the future? Yeah,
it's so interesting, hey? I mean, right now, one of the things I've been looking most closely at is, as the dust has settled, what is that new normal like? So for organisations, for society, for workplaces, for education, and there's a lot that has changed. But I think what COVID showed us is how much can change, but also the things that shouldn't. I think you look at how many instances, and I'm seeing this right now, where just because you can do online learning doesn't mean you necessarily should. Because what you often lose in online learning is some of the nuances of student-teacher interactions. And you also often miss the connections with your peers. One of the most valuable things about education, particularly tertiary education, is the networks you build. I still have friends and colleagues from university days who I connect with. We share ideas, we bounce concepts off each other. That's very rich and valuable. And as I speak to people who maybe are in third year uni now and they've done a bulk of the university online, they're like, I don't really know anyone from my degree. All my mates, I'll say, my friends are still my high school friends, because they're the ones that we've got deep social bonds with. Whereas university feels very transactional. Same with TAFE. And so when it's all online, it becomes transactional. So there are risks that I think we lose some of those social bonds that actually make learning and education rich. But that said, there are huge opportunities for making education more scalable. Now, the number of things we've seen where people are doing courses overseas with universities they would otherwise never been able to do a course with. And so that has opened up amazing doors. But I would say it doesn't replace entirely what we can do as we're physically together learning. There's something about proximity, being in the same room with people who are like-minded, or even from a different perspective, but pursuing the same goal of learning, and the sparking off each other that happens. That's incredibly valuable.
What do you think students can do to help their communication skills? Because there was a lack of that. There was a lack of that social connection in the past 2 or 3 years. And if they're about to finish school and have done half of their VCE online, like, how can students develop their social skills without having that face-to-face connection, or getting back into it now? What can help make them more confident in that?
Gosh, that's a good question. It's something I've probably not given enough thought to. Practically, what can you do? I would say start small. I think for a lot of people, there is that sense of, particularly large groups, large crowds can be overwhelming. Like, did you notice that? Like, you went back in, particularly when lockdowns finished, you're like, oh man, how do you do this again? How do you do small talk? And some of it's a case of relearning those skills when you had them. But in other cases, it's an instance of actually learning the basic things that often you pick up by osmosis. And what I would say is the best thing you can do is be more interested than trying to be interesting. In any social setting, be interested in the people you're engaging with. Most of us have this desire to be interesting. Like, I want to be cool and interesting. I want to seem like I've got it all together. I've got all the answers and I'm well educated and I'm confident and all the rest. I would say that's valuable, but I think if you think about the people who leave the biggest impact on you, it's people who show an interest in you, who ask you questions, who are curious about you, and not just you in terms of what you study or where you're working, but who you are as a person. And I think that's what I find myself constantly in super socially awkward situations, because I'm at conferences where no one knows anyone. And so, and I'm probably a bit more extroverted than introverted, but not hugely. And so I sometimes walk into these rooms and think, oh, mate, here we go. Like 300 people and I know no one. And I do that day after day. So I've had to learn skills to do that because it's not my natural state. And so asking questions, just find someone who also doesn't know others,
Yeah.
And look to help. Like, just go up and say, hey, you go and work this home for you. And like, even sometimes it's a case of just having 3 or 4 of your go-to questions to open conversations up. And what's amazing is you'll think, oh, this is a bit awkward. The level of relief others will have, because they don't know where to start either. And so that's how you show yourself to be a leader, when you're others-centered. Seek others out, try and draw others out, make them the hero of the story, ask them questions, and you'll be amazed how liked you become and how interesting your life becomes, because you get to interact with a huge cross-section of individuals. So I would say that's probably the most simple skill we can all master.
That is a great strategy. Like, and just breaking it down to its core, I think it's awesome.
Great.
Just ask somebody a question.
Truly, yeah.
I want to jump back a little bit, because we've drawn on so many areas of your expertise today. It's obviously quite broad. But what part of your career journey are you most proud of?
That's a good question. I think probably for me, the most significant thing was I had a book, so it would have been, it was the 2nd or 3rd book I had come out. And the reason I'm not sure is because I started working on it first, but it took so long to get from concept to print. And I had 21 or 22 publishers say no. It was about a 3-year process. And it was the hardest thing at that point, the hardest thing I'd ever done was, so it was a project that I was emotionally really invested in. And after 21 no's, I think it was 22nd publisher said yes. And I'll never forget like where I was when the email came through. I think I was in either Cowra or Young, so I'll never forget. And I'm actually not sure how's that. So, but one of these 2 towns, Western New South Wales, on a speaking tour, working with schools, and the email came through from a publisher, and it was a yes. But I remember the motel room I was in. I'll never forget, like, just that moment of accomplishment after 3 years. All the knockbacks, all the times where I was tempted to give up, and people say, no, try again. So it's funny, I think to me that would be the thing I'm most proud of, is just that one particular project. And it was a project I was passionate about and has had a huge impact. Probably one of the most meaningful things I've produced in terms of books and projects. And so that's probably the thing I'd say I'm most proud of, yeah.
How did you keep going back after 21 no's? Like, what kept you motivated?
Yeah, so I guess to answer that, to take a few steps back, it was a bit of it was an unusual book for me. So the thinking behind this was that, so my dad passed away, it's a lot of years now. I was 21, he was 51. So he was really young. All of a sudden, heart attack and gone. Like, just one of those stories where, like, there's no lead up, there's no way to prepare. That whole shock of the family dynamic, and anyone who's experienced that knows exactly what that's like. It was interesting. A few days after he passed away, I found this notebook in his desk where he'd been just writing stories from his life. Didn't know he was about to pass away, and we found this book, and it was the most meaningful thing to have this book of all these rich memories and stories that we would otherwise never have known. And so the project was to create a book, a gift book, to help parents do that. And so there was that sense of, I guess I stuck at it because I'm like, I knew the value of the end product. And I knew that if I could just find a publisher, because it was an unusual thing, it wasn't really a notebook or a journal, it wasn't really a book, like it didn't have lots of words in it, it had lots of questions, prompts to help parents write their stories down. And so I just knew if I could find someone who got the vision behind it and the heart behind it, it would work. And so finally, once I did, and then a big publisher in America picked it up and it took off from there. And I don't get as many in the last year or two, but for a good 5 or 6, 7 years, I'd get emails routinely from people who said, so like my mum passed away or my aunt or whatever, and we found the book that she bought years ago and it's got all these stories like we would never have known. So that's that sense of it being really valuable. And I knew at a gut level it would be. It was just a case of sticking at it until I found a publisher who could see the vision. So that's probably what kept me at it, because it was that sense of almost honouring my dad by following it through, but also just knowing it would be really helpful.
Of course. And I mean, how rewarding would it have been to get those emails? And
huge.
You know it would make an impact, but
Absolutely.
To see it tangibly through an email would be amazing.
Yep.
One of my last questions is, what message would you like to share with high school students to inspire them and motivate to pursue their own passions and dreams?
I think probably the best advice I ever got, and it's the thing that's kept me at, goals or initiatives that when they've gotten hard, the things that encourage me to persist, was just this notion. I remember reading this notion years ago in a quote that public victories are always preceded by hundreds or thousands of private ones. And, that whole notion that we often look at the people who on Instagram seem like their lives are glamorous and wonderful. We just want to get from here to where they are, without realizing all the stuff that is hidden, that is unknown, that the times they turned up, they studied, They applied themselves. They said no to things that they knew would be fun in the moment, but damaging in the long term. Like, these are the things where I think, for me, that's been the most helpful thing, is this idea of public victories, which we all want. We want to be successful and win awards and have breakthroughs in our careers and our lives and become useful and valuable people. But that stuff, the public victories that everyone else sees, are preceded by all the private ones. And so I just say, on those days where you feel like I'm not getting anywhere, I'm not doing anything useful, what are the private victories you're winning today that no one else will know, but you will know? And just the fact that you know them. And I guess a coupled thought with that would be this idea: if you want things that other people won't have, you need to do things other people won't do. And that often means working that a bit extra longer, applying yourself that bit more. Again, saying no to stuff that you know in the short term would be great, but in the long term will rob you of what you're working towards. So that'd be my encouragement. Those are the sort of the thinking, the philosophies that have kept me on track.
What a great sentiment to sort of end on there. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Michael.
You're very welcome.
Pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Cheers.